I direct your attention to the era of Spice Girls, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, and now coming to an arena near you, I'm sure, BTS and all the K-pop stuff, right? Now, I don't know the specifics of their personality, but I guarantee you some extreme BTS fans out there know every little detailed difference and nuance of each member, right? And that makes it important to them because, I mean, straight up, you'll have people doing like BTS quizzes where you're like, oh, I know everything about them. It's a lot different than that. You don't have to be BTS, right? That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that's always kind of been there in terms of having a band or group that offers that much kind of depth.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I am your host, Jack McCarthy. With me is my co-host, Mr. Ed Isola. Ed, what's up? This is episode 204, and I am really excited about this episode.
Same, and I'm having probably what has been the best day of my life so far. Just a fantastic day across the board, and I'm excited to dive in.
Me too, man. So I am super excited to welcome a very special guest to this episode, the guitarist of one of my favorite bands, The Wonder Years, Mr. Casey Cavaliere. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Jack, Ed. It's great to be here. Longtime listener, first time caller. And I do indeed love the show. I love what you guys put out there into the universe. So it's cool to have found my way on here somehow, to have stumbled in off the street.
Yeah, man. I was super pumped to put this together and have you on. So thanks for being here. I feel like our listeners are going to learn a lot today from stories that you've got to share. You know, one of the big things that we talk about, as you know, just from listening to the show, is growing an audience, growing a fan base, building a music career. And you've got a lot to say about all of that on many different fronts. But the Wonder Years, I think, are such a great example of a band that went from a local grassroots following, hitting the road, touring a lot, growing a fan base, meeting people, and building up a following internationally of fans that are loyal and really dig what you guys do. So I'm just super excited to dig into all of that and kind of get your take from start to finish.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to pull back the curtain. You guys do a pretty good job, though, I have to say, of giving some solid perspective and ideas on very substantive methods and methodologies of doing just that. So I'll try to fill in wherever I can, or at least give anecdotal evidence of what happened with us. But again, not all lessons apply to all projects or musicians. There are a few sound principles, but again, we're moving from era to era. One of the first things when we started talking about doing this was interesting because even it wasn't that long ago, but 15 or so years ago, even then the climate was very different online specifically. And so there have been a lot of shifts, and I think it's in many ways kind of decidedly different in how an independent musician has to kind of approach things in terms of growing an audience in a career nowadays. But I think some of the things that we leaned into are often pretty applicable. So I could kind of riff on and on about that, but also, I'm happy if you want to narrow the scope a little bit and kind of curate it. And maybe that would be the most effective way to reel in all of the things that constantly circle around in my brain.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you led with a really good point. And we touch on this a lot on the show. No one strategy or tactic or idea is going to apply to each and every artist or band. And I think that that's a good kind of touch point to kick off our conversation, just because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people listening who have followed the growth of your band, and their path probably will be completely different. But for any listeners who don't know who the Wonder Years are and who you are, just give a little bit of background on you, just to kind of intro, since I really just kind of lightly touched on it, but tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. I will also lightly touch on it. Yes, we are what many would call a pop punk band. Well, obviously, the artist in me would implore you to believe that our sound has evolved quite a bit from its origins. It's still decidedly rooted in that kind of punk rock world. And we came out of Philly. I've lived in Philly my whole life until quite recently, actually, when I moved to Atlanta. And the band grew up kind of in the Philly suburbs, about like a half an hour outside the city, and was kind of the product of two factions, which were three of the members, my bass player, my drummer, and I all went to high school together. And the other three members went to a neighboring high school, and we shared a pretty decent local scene that was kind of being forged out of VFWs and gymnasiums, YMCA, floor shows, hall shows, that kind of thing. So we were lucky in that regard, and we did indeed start out as how I affectionately refer to it as a quite lighthearted project, in that, it was pretty much closer to a pop punk version of a Weird Al album than it was like a serious endeavor, at least with the first couple songs. And then it honestly transitioned into writing songs that we felt had a little bit more substance, because we realized, well, we're having a lot of fun playing these. People are starting to respond musically to what we're doing and enjoying it. Why don't we give our singer the opportunity to undo his decision of day one, well, should I write like real lyrics or joke lyrics? And then all of us are like, oh, definitely joke lyrics. So we kind of began to unravel that. And by the time we were done, we all went to school in and around the Philly area. I went to Drexel, my singer went to Temple, and a few of the other guys, like all pretty regional in the Pennsylvania area. And we kept playing weekends and, coming back, doing local shows, maybe doing like 3 shows, like a tri-state area, like Jersey, New York, Philly kind of thing, all throughout college, and happened to like kind of keep a floor of momentum going with the band and evolving it little by little with that. And that led to our first full length that was put out on an independent label called No Sleep Records, and did a little bit more of touring, skipped out on a semester of school to kind of do a full US DIY run. And then by the time we were all finished up with school, we kind of looked around and we were like, well, we kind of have a chance to like maybe give it a shot. And we did. And now that was, 12. It was too long ago, for my brain to really have it sink in. But yeah, and we've been touring internationally ever since. And we are actually later this year about to release what I think will be our 7th record, which is kind of crazy, on top of a number of other different smaller splits, projects, EPs, singles, and whatnot. And it's been quite a learning experience on top of many other things. So yeah, that's kind of our history as far as the band goes.
Very cool. Awesome. Yeah, I definitely think that helps give some context for sure, just to give listeners a sense of where you've been and kind of where you guys are going too. I'm curious, kind of like dovetailing off of what you were saying about like the social landscapes changing online for sure, but also the social landscapes in general, like, real human social landscapes. The process of growing your fan base, especially from that tipping point where you guys were kind of like, we have a shot at this. What was the process of growing your fan base like? What were some of the things that were important to you guys as far as growing? I know you spent a lot of time on the road, but social media in 2009, 2010, 2011 looked completely different than what it looks like now. So I'm curious, like, especially in those rapid kind of periods of expansion that you guys had, what's different then versus what you're kind of experiencing now?
Well, a couple things. One, when the band first started, the platforms that people were talking about were things like MySpace. And a lot of bands in our world, that was our portal, if you will, to other fans. That was our place to oogle over vanity metrics, which were play counts back then, long before streaming DSPs. And that was also the place where if you wanted, you could go find some super secret robots to inflate your play counts, which imagine if that existed still now to this day, right?
Imagine.
And that is a touch of sarcasm. I feel like your listeners are, if they listen to this show, they have to be intelligent. So I'm sure they are picking up on that. But just to be clear, just in case, I don't want to be like, well, that does exist. You can do that now. It's like, yes, I know. So a lot of it was initially like the MySpace pure volume type stuff, where we were in there on those boards, in those communities, and just kind of doing organic outreach, finding other bands. I mean, those were most of the tours that we booked and our singer kind of put together. It was finding other bands via MySpace, right, in other cities, and offering like a show swap. Be like, hey, we're coming through. I'm trying to find a date. Can you put me in touch with anybody that does local shows? Or maybe if it's like, hey, if we combine our efforts and put a show on there together, we can split the risk, and then I'll do it when you guys come through Philly, right? So our singer did a lot of that. And again, that exists now as well. And it's something that I think sometimes a lot of independent musicians forget about, especially when they are very focused and the ad landscape kind of thrust a lot about digital marketing, ads, and other things which are relevant to the right time and place for an artist and the right point in their career. But, it almost offers them out there as a shorthand instead of doing the like one-on-one outreach of, hey, maybe message this person and have like a real interaction, So back then, that's kind of all there really was in that regard. So that was like you message somebody on MySpace, and then you had a whole thread, which is effectively like band email land back and forth of messaging other bands, and then this person that does the shows in that area that on their MySpace page. And it was a really great lesson in the initiative of where do we play? I can't get a show, which is something I'm sure at least a few of your listeners are sympathetic to as far as a pain point, and trying to get shows, trying to drum up more of that, figuring out where to play and how to get on those bills. This was kind of the hand that we were dealt in terms of the fact that like, hey, if none of the clubs downtown in Philly, like the larger venues, are willing to like put us on an opening slot or give us a shot in one of the smaller rooms, we will go and book our own shows. And then we will try to do that with like-minded people in all of these other cities and effectively string together a network. So MySpace and the internet and the way things worked from a peer-to-peer situation back then was very organic and grassroots in its community building. And the metric stuff was there, but everybody still knew it's like, well, that's probably just a bot. That's probably why they have so many followers or whatever. And you would still like message these bands. There was a much more human element to it, where I think if you took initiative, you were rewarded for that, as long as the stuff that you were doing was cool and had other bands' attention peaked.
And that's a really interesting point to think back to the MySpace days of how the social part of early social media was very much one-to-one social, as opposed to like one-to-many, which is what we see, a lot when it comes to trying to grow an audience with advertising. You're trying to reach as many people as you can for the cheapest impression and get their attention with the best possible creative, where it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is like, for us early on, it was making connections and building community sort of one by one, and, kind of being powered by the internet to do that.
Well, it was powered by the internet, but it was also powered by touring, because then we would go play those shows where there were a very manageable number of people in attendance, and you could have an interaction with probably close to 100% of them early on at some of the worst attended shows. And you're also very visible and very approachable. So the idea being that you did that enough, we spent enough time on those US runs, then like 5 people that were like, those guys are pretty cool, and their set was a lot of fun, take that away in that city and then turn into 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 the next time from a actual word of mouth kind of impression, because they have a lot more than just a band whose bot friended them on MySpace, So there's a lot of that too, where it applies IRL, so to speak. But yeah, Ed, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we've got a lot of talkative guys on the podcast today. No, I'm just kidding. No, I was going to say that it's interesting because things have changed, but I feel like the core takeaway to what I just heard you say is, as much as you can go one-to-one with people, that's what really drives the career. And Jack kind of mentioned we're doing all the ads and that kind of stuff these days where it is one to many, but the artists that I see have the most success, whether it's myself or other people at IndieX, it's like people that go out of their way to, once you have this one to many kind of ad campaign going, engage one to one. That's what I see drive growth of the career, growth of the fan base. Like you're saying, if one person watched your show and liked it and now they're bringing 5 people next time, it's like the same thing kind of online. So it's interesting because the platforms have changed and you can reach more people, but I feel like the core values kind of have not changed, honestly.
And you know what? I love that you brought that up, Ed, because it reminds me of another really kind of great point and a mindset to look at in that regard, is the idea that those interactions, even though, yes, like you are casting a much wider net when you try to put things in front of people in terms of digital ads, However, the end result, and this is how you guys also kind of preach about it as well, from what I've gained from just looking inside of like the indiepreneur umbrella and world, and from the podcast and show, and knowing Jack especially, like, is that the whole idea of doing that is not that you think you are going to have 100% conversion rate of completely cold traffic to all like core, as we call them, lords, fans that are lording out over your every word and song and hanging on everything. No, the idea is that you are doing that in order to have that funnel down to one person that you will ultimately have a much deeper interaction with and an engagement with, to give them things that they will then remember beyond just that song they like, beyond just, oh, that's cool, the band sounded tight, right? Which I think now more than ever, fast forwarding to 10, 20 years, the platforms that we're on, there's exponential amounts of noise and everybody is putting it out there. However, the idea being like, if you get someone's attention for even just a moment, a great song is no longer something that necessarily sticks with and converts a fan immediately to a fan of that artist and a fan of that artist for life. So you have to really think deeply about what your brand is and your identity as an artist overall, especially if you only have a small number of pieces in your catalog release, right? Say you only have an EP. That's only 5 chances to give someone things to latch onto about you creatively as an artist and stylistically. But if they go to one of these other platforms, whether it be TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, where you choose to show up and show off other parts of yourself, that might be the thing, just like that conversation standing in a VFW across the country with one person after a set, where maybe you don't even end up talking about the set. It starts with a, hey, that was cool, I liked your set. And maybe it ends with, oh, you're an Eagles fan. Oh, that's cool. I'm actually from Philly, but I'm all the way here. That was cool. I heard you guys say on stage that you're from Philly, yada, yada, yada. Then that person walks away being like, oh, it's that band from Philly. And that's one more step closer to them remembering that later on, when inevitably you hope that they see 6 months from now that name come up and be like, oh, that was that band that played that show that was from Philly. I like those guys. That bass player was cool, or that guitar player talked a lot, right? And that guitar player did, because maybe it was me. But yes, and so that goes down to thinking of it in that way and taking that large range of potential fans and understanding that the goal is to have real substantive interaction and engagement. And if you do that one by one, this is kind of what I say to a lot of my coaching clients. It seems like the slowest possible route, but if we're talking from like a fable standpoint, like a tortoise in the hairstyle thing, sometimes doing that work, and you can do that as you go and still try a lot of other different outreaches. And I think that's, highly recommended too, right? To try as many different things as possible, but don't discount the value of DMing another band in your world that's in a different city that sounds like you, that you dig, and letting them know that, starting a conversation. Or if someone comments on something, don't just like the comment, realize, hey, you got them to stop and like say something, give them a little bit more than that. And that's also how our fan relationship has changed a little bit over the years too, but we can get into more of that.
You saying that reminds me of a story from one of our clients at the agency. We were running an album launch a couple years ago. Ed, you'll remember the band that I'm talking about. They were running an album launch and they were trying to get people signing up for their list to go through this launch experience during which they can hear the record before anybody else. They could see behind the scenes content. They'd get made a sales offer at the end. And they were having a hard time getting people sign up kind of at the 11th hour. And I think Ed had gone onto a call with them and was like, hey, like you guys should just go and engage with everybody who's commenting on these posts, on these ads, like engage and like let them know that you see them. And just let's see what happens. Ed, you could probably tell more about how it went, but it went gangbusters.
Yeah, I think they like doubled their opt-ins, in 12 hours because they responded to a couple hundred comments. And it's like, just your comment, Casey, about like, you don't just like the comment, like give them something. Well, first of all, if someone's actually commenting on your post, I feel like you're probably pretty freaking excited that somebody cares enough to comment on your post. It's not like, your friend or your family. So it's like, to me, it's a natural thing to comment back to them, but it's like, it's so easy to get a conversation going with a like and whatever, some simple comment. It doesn't have to be a paragraph. That even at shows that we've gone to, it's like people have been, hey, I wasn't going to come to the show, but you commented and responded on my comment on your post. So I was like, I should give it a chance. And it's like, wow, okay. So I don't know, it's just crazy. But is everybody in your band as outgoing as you are? Because I feel like it's easy for me to approach people and DM people and whatever. And I would imagine the same for you, but I'm kind of curious if everyone in the group's that way or how you guys balance that with multiple people.
Yeah, there's a lot of us. And I like to think that certainly in one-on-one scenarios, we are all very friendly and outgoing gentlemen. I like all of the people in my band. However, I am also biased, and they are more like brothers and family to me at this point. With social media, I guess specifically, like I said at the top of this, it's a different ballgame for everyone. So while we are a unified front in terms of what we want to do and what our goals with putting things out under the band umbrella are, and off of band socials, the goals are a little different. I look at it this way. Someone might follow a band account purely for the reason that they're like, I want to know when they're playing shows, right? But then someone goes through and then follows individual members of that band if they're really, really much deeper fans. Now, maybe obviously other people come and go for many other reasons, depending on how you engage on social media. And for us, everybody individually, I think the natural trend, it kind of waxes and wanes. When we're on tour, we're probably a lot more active because I think there's a lot more just generally happening, a lot more excitement from city to city. We're visiting our favorite places, seeing friends. We're excited ourselves about the shows. So we kind of come alive in that regard. And then the same way, when we're off tour, everybody kind of trying to put their own world forward. And it's like, hey, you showed up, this is me, right? Or this is what I'm willing to share. And if you're in for that, then you're probably a very deep fan, or you're probably, my mom or something, right? Or you probably have another interest for some reason. And I think everybody's always interested in the conversation, but I will say to that point that there was a very large period of time actually right after that kind of MySpace era groundswell that I mentioned, when things started heating up pretty quickly. We went on Warped Tour for the first time, and right around post Upsides into Suburbia, things started getting really overwhelming, where I'll be completely candid, and I'm probably not alone in this regard, and I just was able to identify it and speak to it in hindsight. But I had some pretty serious social media anxiety. It's actually part of the reason why still to this day, I never kind of got reactivated so much on Twitter, just because I think there was so much noise and so overwhelming trying to grapple with what to put out there. And then it's all kind of there in an instant, good, bad, ugly. And I think that might have been a personal thing for me, but that's also important for every artist to understand, that it's just like, if you're uncomfortable with something, trying to think about why or what about it is uncomfortable, and think about how you can flip that script and what you can do to still maybe show up, but in a way that feels okay for you. Because not that this will kind of divert into, or that I want it to divert into, a mental health conversation, but that's also real, because so much is being asked of independent artists. And especially anytime they go and read a blog or watch a YouTube video that's like, how do I essentially break it down to this subsect of how do I get famous, right? Or how do I grow my stuff? It's really overwhelming and can sometimes almost have an easier said than done kind of mentality. You're like, oh, I walk away. It's like, oh, I can definitely do that. Like one post a day. Yeah. And then all of a sudden a week later, you're like, yo, I am stressing about this one post. Like, what is it? Is it good? Should I not? And then on Twitter, it's like, you can, be like, I don't know, am I going to be the guy that tweets what I just ate for lunch? Or am I going to be the guy that has a real hot take, and then all of a sudden, like, the internet explodes? And I think for a big period of time, it's actually still to this day, and I don't mind it that much, to be completely honest, but still to this day, why probably I would have a much wider following base on some of these platforms if I had been active through this period where we really kind of ramped up and took off. And I just wasn't, because it was a little too overwhelming with posting and commenting, and you get 1,000 different opinions right back off of just something that you're like, well, I thought that was really not controversial at all, So it's also kind of a mental health experiment to grapple with some of those things and to be able to show up consistently. So that has also changed a lot as the band grew.
We had a really interesting conversation last week with another one of our team members here, Shay, who came on the podcast. We were talking about some of those same concepts, like why artists get anxiety when it comes to social media and being authentic on social media. She kind of broke it down to the same thing. She was like, it's mean out there, like it's a mean internet. So yeah, people are afraid to get canceled or blasted or whatever it might be. And I think that you're right. That does exist kind of at all levels. It's interesting to hear you say, what kind of content should I post was a potential point of anxiety for you. I'm curious now where you're at, and the rest of the band too. Have you guys just kind of individually and as a collective kind of just gone in on the features of different social platforms that you like? I see you on Instagram, for example, on your personal, doing the IG kind of polls often. And I know that Dan, your singer, does that as well. And I think that that's cool, like AMA style stuff. But is that kind of where you found like a space that's safe, so to speak? Or it's like, this is where I can bring value to my fans and do something cool? You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And admittedly, yes, I am aware that it is a pretty curated space in that way that, like I said, if you found your way to me as a Wonder Years fan or to any band member specifically, I mean, our fans are great. So you're probably going to be pretty nice and understanding and receptive about it. Yeah. So that I think plays a huge role. But then also, yeah, it's like those are the people that they spend the most time and are the most engaged and supportive in many ways, not just from like a financial supporting or backing, but from they're the ones that have Wonder Years tattoos. They're the ones that are putting together and going out and advocating for everything Wonder Years in a space where it belongs there, and in every conversation. So yeah, a lot of those times, if I'm going to open myself up to answer questions or just directly engage with people if they have really specific questions or are in a band and want some like actual feedback, if they've come that far and are willing to kind of put themselves out there and do that, then I'll do my best to respond. And I've found, for me, again, we talk about like personal choice. For me, Instagram happens to be something that I have felt resonated with the way I like to kind of like tell a story, curate it. I'm starting to do a bit more, video-based stuff, just like everybody is, just also because I realized that I take so much time trying to like write out a long-winded post to get my thoughts in order. And sometimes it's just way easier to hit the record button for 30 seconds and be like, oh, okay, cool, there. So as it's probably no surprise to anybody that's listening to this, but yeah, so every band member kind of has found their own, like, are they comfortable or are they not? And I think that's totally not only a healthy thing, but also kind of gives even more depth to our band as a brand in general, and then almost is kind of like a rewarding thing that if you are that close to us as a band and part of that community, that if you follow all of us, you're not just going to see the same ad flyer or opt-in 6 times in a row. You're going to get different things and be like, oh, Matt's the one that like, he loves dachshunds. I love that because I had a dachshund when I was a kid. And I know that he lives in Atlanta now. And so he's doing this and this and this. And I think that's really cool because I've always thought about moving down to Atlanta or Nashville, like stuff like that, where you actually have like real things that about these people that they're willing to share. And it also kind of does a really nice job of humanizing it to be like, hey, remember, if you were going to say something mean, I am a person. We are people, even though it sometimes might get boiled down to just a logo in the middle of an egregiously large ad mat for a Vegas festival in 2022 that will remain nameless. Sometimes as simple as that too. So hopefully that answers the question, but.
No, I think that really does, like, amazingly, actually. It's a really good point. And I don't think we've ever really broken that down quite like that before, about the depth that individual band members, if you're in a band or members of a group or whatever it might be, bring to the fan experience, to the customer journey at the level of going a bit deeper as far as the brand goes, where you're not hearing the same thing said the same way. Ed, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because like you guys have a big group of people in your band too.
Yeah, I'm looking at the photo right now, Ed. I know. I was like, I know you got some personalities in there.
I think you said it perfectly. Like the dachshund thing was interesting because, well, we don't have any diehard dachshund fans in our band. It's like, we got people that love yoga and classical music and that kind of stuff. And I think that as many touch points as you can give people authentically across your band, it's like, yes, you have your unified presence that if they see a video or hear a song, they're going to see the polished press photos. But I think on social media, it's such a great way to give people an avenue to connect with, like, oh, I like the song and I do yoga, therefore, so-and-so is my favorite member. But really what that means is I love the whole band. Like, I'm going to come see the show, I'm going to listen to the music, and it benefits everybody. I think a lot of times what I hear is that, hey, we have 5 or 6 people in the group. how do we do this? And I actually think it's a huge benefit once you can get it coordinated, because like I said, if you have your first foot forward kind of polished and you have your press photos and stuff, after that it's a huge benefit because one, you can have different interests. Two, it shows you can entertain larger crowds. That's something we see. We split off into pockets of like 6 people. So no, it's a great point, and it really is a benefit if you use it to your advantage.
Yeah, and the divide and conquer factors too. We did get lucky, especially like those early days, whether it was on Warped Tour or doing signings or even just at shows. You can rotate out and just for the entire show have at least one member just there hanging around merch that somebody be like, oh, I recognize you. You're the drummer like with the long hair. I'll come over, right? Whatever it is. And I think that's also really important because then it doesn't get too taxing or there isn't too much weight put on one band member. Now, if you're a solo artist, that kind of just comes with the territory, right? And then you have to find some creative solutions or ways around that. And then also in a band now, it's interesting the way that things have transitioned and that we've really found a nice rhythm with is realizing what the strengths are of everybody in your band and what they're comfortable and or able to kind of take on. So we've always to some degree kind of like self-managed and self-driven our ship, even though we've had people like co-manage, for years at a time and periods, and currently have a good friend of ours who also fills that role right now. But we are ultimately, the driving creative vision and logistically the ones that are, saying, hey, this is what we want our year to look like. This is the tour that we want to do, and then going together and putting like a routing with our agent together or putting some packages together. And what's nice about that is there are people that are really organized in the band that do a really good job of that. And then there are other people in the band that are really good at writing, creating, and churning ideas. And then there's kind of everything in between. I mean, like half of our band got into the gear side of production, myself included, right? So then there's a little bit more heavy lifting when it comes time to putting together live rigs and doing the research and talking about how we can get our stuff to sound better and make a more cohesive stage setup and sound. Then there are people that are singers that are equally talented in their own way. And I would much rather just have them spend time getting the vision and filling in the holes on a song that we've been working on than trying to do a microphone shootout or learn about like really intricate gear routing. That's not a good use of their time, right? So, and in that way, and I've seen this work with a lot of other independent bands. There's actually a great band from Detroit that I've worked with and kind of helped do some coaching and consulting with, and they write incredible songs, but it's the same way, like their bass player, very tech savvy. He's the one that's putting the rig together. And I kind of see each one of them, see my band in them, and I'm like, you're the one you're the logistics guy. You're the guy that loves spreadsheets and loves putting together a release schedule. Okay, great. We're going to talk about that. And then, some of the other people, it's like, you might be the ones that are really good at figuring out the sonics of something or troubleshooting how something could sound better, right? So that's also really important. But then beyond that, the personality stuff, this is not a new tactic or phenomenon. I direct your attention to the era of Spice Girls, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, and now coming to an arena near you, I'm sure, BTS and all the K-pop stuff, right? Now, I don't know the specifics of their personality, but I guarantee you some extreme BTS fans out there know every little detailed difference and nuance of each member, right? And that makes it important to them because, I mean, straight up, you'll have people doing like BTS quizzes where you're like, oh, I know everything about them. It's a lot different than that. You don't have to be BTS, right? That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that's always kind of been there in terms of having a band or group that offers that much kind of depth.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's so good. It's not to get like too philosophical here, but it's the idea of brand unity is happening through the diversity of the members of the band or the group or whatever it is. And I just think that that's wildly cool and very human. That's such a good point. I don't think we've ever unpacked it like that before on the show. So I'm stoked. Kind of pulling at that thread a little bit further, like talking about authenticity. That's something that you guys kind of strive to bring to the table. And I think that kind of powers the authenticity of the band's brand as well. And I think most of your fans would probably say the same thing, oh, they're a very authentic band. I like what they do. I like what they put in front of us. Something that I think you guys have been always really solid at, and saying this as someone who's watched it, over the years, is making, not only portraying that way, but then also carrying that over to the kinds of tours that you put together, to the offers that you put together, whether it be for sales or for whatever. I think back to like when The Greatest Generation came out and you did like the run of pop-up shows or pop-up shops. That kind of offer is like mind-numbingly cool and really ambitious, but also down to Halloween shows. There was a live stream during COVID, I remember. You had a membership subscription style merch offering. All of that is like pretty tuned into what you guys as a brand and what the band is kind of all about. I'd love to know individually kind of how you guys brainstorm that out and what that kind of looks like at Wonder Years HQ. And also like something that a lot of our listeners might not have insight into is like, where does a record label and a record label marketing team come into play on some of that stuff? That's kind of insight that we don't always get.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there, but I'll start from the top.
I come with the loaded questions.
Hey, honestly, I watch myself do the same thing on my podcast. I'm just like, ooh, I should go back and break that down into like 7 different questions. Sorry, I was just too excited. No, so I would start by noting that I think it's always been really important to us, and I know you guys have touched on this many times on the show, but it bears repeating again, and because we have always had it work as one of our guiding principles from very early on, is asking yourself about the value to ask ratio, right? Of would you care about this? Like looking at, hey, the first thing is, I hate when bands do that. Or, yeah, I see every band do that, but like, I've never been interested. Now, that doesn't mean you are one person in doing that. But if everybody in the band is like, has anybody ever done this with a band? Have you done this or ever bought that from a band, that item? No, it's like, what would be unique and memorable? And so it kind of starts there. And again, having 6 heads in the room to brainstorm, whether we're in the van or, early on and kind of starting out an idea. Our singer is an extremely idea-driven person when it comes to a lot of these things, but ideas and thoughts can come from everywhere. And maybe if it's not something that's feasible, that's the catalyst for what we end up doing, or it ends up kind of twisting and turning into whatever kind of offering it becomes. But yeah, that's, I think, the first refinement level for us is, does it kind of like make sense to all of us as a band? And what's been interesting is over the last 15 years, like we kind of now know, yes, this seems decidedly on brand for us in these kind of ways. Whether it's merch, it's like how are you guys with cursing on the show? Before I,
by all means.
Okay. I had a feeling it was a safe space, but part of what we did very early on and saw a very large response to was calling out a lot of bullshit, whether it be a festival that is not paying bands or going about something the wrong way, or a band that does something really shitty and, not trying to be the internet police, but trying to at least be like, hey, we want this to be a safe community, a positive, we can do better, and having that and trying to do that, in as best we can. And I think that kind of became baked into our DNA as a band and how people viewed us as well early on. And continuing with that to be like, hey, does this seem like an offer that in one heartbeat would just completely like flip the switch on everything that we otherwise kind of have said no or yes to, and refining it and thinking about it like that. And the other thing you mentioned, touring, for us, choosing who you align yourself with, I've always thought of it as, especially early on, and a lot of young bands are like looking to try and gain enough momentum to catch the eye of, sometimes it's labels or sometimes it's other bands, and make those relationships to end up on a support tour, right? To kind of start climbing that ladder. I would say then once you get into a world, and if you do get off the ground, and Ed, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this too, for where you guys are at and what touring plans are in the past and coming up, because we got into a place in the middle of our career where we did start to get a lot of offers from other bands, other bands that we knew, other bands that were doing very well. And some of them overlapped, and sometimes you had to pick and choose. And some of those were like, holy shit, I can't believe I'm literally turning down a dream tour with one of my favorite bands ever. Like, what reality do I live in? And that's because it wasn't the right time or place, or we had to take a different tour, or also the other way, turning down the opportunity to play in front of an exponentially larger crowd, like turning down, a support slot on an arena tour because you're like, that doesn't do a good thing for our band. That feels like a middle finger to a lot of our other fans right now, where the other alternative was going and playing for them in their space and in a club on a different tour that really solidifies where we're at and where our band ethos is at. At a certain point, sure, you got to step out and kind of test the waters, but that's also an important thing. And I always kind of looked at it from a marketing realm perspective in some ways. One, if we just musically do not at all jive with an opportunity or whatever, then that's clear. But then also realizing that brand alignment is a huge thing. The fact that you guys are having me on your show, I don't take lightly, because you've built something, a brand, and people trust you and trust the things you say, the way you think about these things. So I could come on here and completely blow that up and completely tarnish your brand, right? So in the same way that if I was on the Creative Juice support tour that I was lucky enough to get a slot on, you guys would be like, we're only having you because we like that one song. We like that number about MySpace that you play, okay? But all of a sudden, if I got out of line and did something crazy, it's like that would fall back on you, in a certain way and color it. So it's about making those choices too in a really calculated way to try to stay authentic to who you are. And it's not just touring, it's that goes into every other world, right?
It's crazy because I feel like when you're starting out, the gold standard is like, man, it'd be so cool if I could get this opening slot for so-and-so, right? Like, at least internally for me, and I was always like, man, if we could open for this band, we'd be set, or this band, we'd be set. And we never did any of those things. And then like where we are today, we are starting to get opening opportunities presented to us. And it's like, well, actually, like you said, it doesn't make as much sense. And not only does it not make as much sense, it also costs us money and fan connection. And so anyway, it's just interesting because I sometimes think that the things that you think you want really aren't the best things for you. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because that was a revelation I had too, where it's like, okay, well, this actually isn't probably the best career path, and it kind of isolates some fans potentially.
Yeah, and maybe that's a perfect segue into how to frame the conversation of labels if you're an independent artist. Two, the things that sometimes maybe you think you want, but understanding what they actually mean when you get there, I think is also really important, because we've spent the majority of our career at this point on a label, in a partnership, so to speak, with a label. And that's facilitated a lot of really great things. It's not like your Willy Wonka golden ticket to be like, the second I'm on a label's roster and on their website, I am successful and we're hitting every metric that we could ever dream of, right? That's also just not it. Now, it does do some important things, and it depends on what your goals are, right? So if you are in a style of music or genre of music that a certain label is like a flagship provider of in that world, they are the preeminent folk punk label, right? Then maybe sacrificing some of the things that you could otherwise have, whether it be monetarily, royalty rate, merch rights, whatever, might actually be a good move for your long-term brand, because you get put in the fold right next to all their other artists, and it's a taste-making thing, and it's a trust thing, a social proof thing. However, if you're an artist that is trying to curate a much different sound, and maybe something that from the other side, a label is like, hey, this is the next big thing, and this person, we think this is the next like Nirvana grunge band, like we're going to go and try and get that because we're cashing in, then ideally there's a world where you could just assemble a team yourself or have maybe already done it, have the leverage, and be able to look them in the eye and being like, all the things that I want to do, you don't bring that to the table for me. You might bring money to the table for me, but also if you're just a bank, the interest rate's pretty shitty on that, right? There's a lot to think about. And this is also when I talk with some of my coaching clients, and I've heard you talk about different clients at your agency too, the label goal should not be the finish line. Jack and I have talked about this a little bit from like a production standpoint. I always look at it in a linear way, in the sense that when you are putting together a record, you're going to write a song like it's not going to be recorded. Like you can just play it in a room, and the arrangement and the parts are going to sound great, and someone can stand in that room and say, that's a killer song. If you record it, you're going to record it as though no one has to mix it. You should just have tracks and try and do the setup and prep so that it sounds good. And then when you go to mix it, you should mix it like you're not going to have somebody master it. Mix it in that way. And that's a philosophy where probably a lot of your like clients that are into production have heard that ideology before. And I think it stands by it and the wisdom's good. But you can also turn that into the approach of an independent musician from their career standpoint. Go about your career like there is no label at the end, right? I mean, Ed, that's kind of what you were saying. You were just like, okay, cool. This is not the reality. Like the tours just aren't coming. And now look, now you're in a completely different position and you've gained that leverage where you're like, yo, we have streaming numbers. We have solid fans that are actually loving what we're doing. And there's a lot of traffic and engagement right now. Well, now I feel like you're going to have to meet me halfway on some of these things, if you really want it. And you can do the reasoning of like, well, isn't that effectively just what we're doing? But like, you're kind of just putting some money into it. Well, what if I went and found somebody else that could put a little bit of money into it or got a little bit of my own money to put into it right now? Then I could just have 100% of the profits.
Yeah, you get leverage. You get leverage. Like you can't operate as if somebody's going to come save the day for you.
Yeah, and labels nowadays are, because of the world, they are not looking for a completely untried gamble. They are looking for something that has already gone out and sussed out that social proof a little bit. They're looking for a grassroots groundswell because they want you to do all of the groundwork and they just want to be able to come to the table and pour gasoline on the fire. Not everyone, but I would say our experience, we've had some really great allies in the labels that we've been with, and specifically that's Hopeless Records. And I think the one thing that they're great at doing is workshopping what may or may not be feasible and why from an idea standpoint that we bring to them. And then maybe helping execute those visions, whether it be from a logistics standpoint or a monetary standpoint that comes out of a marketing budget, right? The pop-up shops, things like that. Sometimes those things are facilitated and made possible because ultimately we're trying to make moments more than just merchandise or more than just a show. And sometimes that's, I think, for us too, is a really big thing that every time we're just like, hey, more than just doing an in-store, can we do something that is maybe a little bit more special? Now it ended up being more work, but it was our own curated version of in-stores that were decidedly wonder years, and were a special thing for anybody that got to come and be there, see the acoustic set, see some exclusive behind the scenes photos. And then also there was a bunch of exclusive, like limited pop-up merchandise that you could only get there. I mean, we straight up went and sourced like a couple hundred unique denim jackets and sewed custom patches onto it. So it literally, you're walking in there and you are buying one of a kind. Each jacket on the rack is different than the next one, kind of stuff like that.
Legit cut and sew offers. Yeah.
And again, it was, I mean, we went to a bunch of thrift stores. I remember in Chicago, we were like, we're going to need more. We're like, we didn't think that they would go this fast. And we like walked down the street and ran around to like 5 thrift stores just to try and find blank secondhand denim jackets to go for the last pop-up shop to get them embroidered and get the cut and sew job done on them. So stuff like that. And fans do remember. And so to this day, at shows, I'll see someone walking around in it and I'll be like, you were at the pop-up shop. Yes, like that's awesome. And I think that's a cool thing in the own way too, because then it transports me back to that memory. Be like, wow, that's amazing. I love that. They're still here.
I love the idea of moments versus just merch or just music. And I think that that's really cool. And it sounds like it's something that you guys created not only for the fans, but I mean, just your statement there about like seeing people wearing a denim jacket. It was a moment for you too. I think, which is, it kind of makes it a two-way street, which is really, really cool.
And it bookmarks those chapters in our career too, from like a mental standpoint, where those are the things that I remember when we did like four shows in 24 hours. It was hell. It was not sleeping in lunacy, but we did it. Philly, New York, Chicago, LA in 24 hours. And that's a moment for anybody that was at those shows. Yeah, honestly, they were probably not that LA show at Chain Reaction was probably pretty rough. We were pretty screwed up by that point. But if you were there, it kind of didn't matter because you're like, I can't believe they made it. Like, we were late, right? Like, literally everybody's there and it's like 7:00 and we like rush in and we're like, literally just got off from the airport. So that's like a moment where even though it's like, it's not perfect, but people are like, holy shit, like, they literally did just come from the airport. Like, I saw them get out of the shuttle. Stuff like that. I think it's cool to look back on, but it also is memorable for the people that made the effort to be there.
Yeah, for sure. I love what you said about from the team perspective, where the label comes into play on filling in the gaps on logistics and feasibility of things, which is an interesting kind of last point that I wanted to ask you about. Talking about feasibility, like, you do a lot of stuff. You're not just the guitarist in the Wonder Years. You've got a studio, you've got a podcast, you're an entrepreneur, really. And I think that that's, something that a lot of artists don't necessarily think about when they go into chasing just music. But to hear from you, like someone who's been touring the world, with a very successful band, what got you into entrepreneurial space and starting True Level, in starting the record process? Where did all of that come into play? Like, is it always something that has kind of been like a spark for you? And kind of what's happening next for it? Just tell us a little bit about all of it.
Well, I will certainly say that I maybe didn't realize it at first as it was kind of transitioning along the way outside of Wonder Years. An entrepreneur, right, is an interesting word because the way I've kind of come to view that is, more than anything else, that might imprint some images, in people's head saying that. But the way I think about it is more or less being obsessed with learning and being a student and finding a problem and then being wholly wrapped around and curious about finding a solution for that problem, whether it be a problem for yourself or a problem for other people or something that just can be made better, right? Or done better or done in a different creative way. So the first thing that you mentioned in terms of True Level Studio and doing some production stuff outside of the band with other artists, that is seemingly a pretty simple and gradual transition, just merely for the fact that I was writing songs for the band, and throughout high school. And you start out doing it in, GarageBand, Logic, and then your demos evolve with each record you make. You see how records get made on a professional level. You start stretching your techniques, and every time you come to do a record, those ideas and the way you put those ideas down get more elaborate. Your threshold for taste and quality start lifting the more you do it and the more you work with super talented people like we've been lucky enough to do. And I think at that point you kind of look and be like, well, more so than like just the songs, I'm like kind of obsessed with figuring out how to like do the underlying sonic production stuff and just the overall vision of what makes a great record, of what makes, I think for me early on, what makes the difference of, hey, these are what my band sound like. And this is what like real band songs sound like. Initially, it was juxtaposing like, now, well, this is my band's demo, but like, it doesn't sound like, this Yellow Card record, or it doesn't sound like that, this Fall Out Boy record. Right. And understanding, well, why? Like, what are the differences, and trying to inch closer to that and realizing it's not just the gear. It's not just the sound. It's even not just the mix. It's kind of everything that goes into it, and being obsessed with that and trying to find a way to do more of that, even when Wonder Years wasn't making a record or when I wasn't writing songs for Wonder Years. And in that way, it was kind of cool because then you start to go find other people that have similar tastes, like a lot of, maybe a lot of similar music, but have a whole record worth of it that they want to bring to that point, right? That they want to be like, I want this to sound like my favorite records. I want this to hit me in the same way. And I know these songs do when they're in my head or when I'm playing them. Can you help us make that happen on record? So that was the entrepreneurial sense there, and it transitioned, and I just wanted to be doing more of that because it gave me a creative fulfillment and a way to stretch with bands that maybe shared some overlap stylistically as far as influences with my band, but also maybe stretched out in a lot of different directions, which was really cool. Without me like writing this weird noise rock EP and then writing a shoegaze EP. And so I could do that and then help them and bring things that I'd learned making Wonder Years records and seeing all of those things get done at a really high level to those artists. So that was that. And then an interesting thing happened here where I'm pretty sure you heard about this pandemic, right? When that kind of hit, I think a lot of creatives specifically were charged with, the industry just shut down, live touring, the service industry, entertainment, right? So everybody was hit differently. It was really tough. And there have been a lot of really tough moments in a lot of different industries like that over the years. And I think it comes down to an entrepreneur is someone that also kind of in a stoic sense sees the obstacle as the way. And by that, I mean, you were charged with, well, I can just wait around. I can put my arms up and say, well, I guess I can't do anything until this is over. Or you can say, well, what can I still do? Or if this is here, how can I at least make the most of it? Or what part of what I do might still translate into this new pandemic reality, you know? And for me, I took the opportunity to do two things with that. One, I did start the podcast, which you're aware of, and the second season will actually start in February. So I don't know when this will come out, but if it's in February, then there are episodes out now. It's called The Record Process, and it's hosted by myself and my other studio partner. We have a ton of fun episodes. I'm going to tell you about some of them after this, Jack, and you're going to, I think, like it.
We'll link to The Record Process in the show notes so that you guys can check it out. I'm particularly excited about season 2, so I'm stoked.
You know what? I just got one episode back from my editor as we were speaking, and I think specifically I know it's got your name on it just based on what I know about you.
Ooh, I'm excited.
And it may or may not be on that meme ad, Matt, for when we were young. So I did start that because I thought it was a great time that's something that can be done remotely. And then one of the other things that I was learning, which is kind of what also, interestingly enough and serendipitously enough, brought me to you, Creative Juice, and then everything you guys do at Indiepreneur, was the idea that as I would work with younger bands in the studio, we would finish a project, and then I would inevitably start to get a call maybe a month later, maybe a couple months later, with questions that ranged from, hey, should we do a release show or does it really matter? To what's the best way to release these songs? Do you think we should do one at a time? Everybody's talking about singles now. Or, does it make more sense for us to kind of approach it in a more batch format? And every question in between, right? And then you start to realize all the time and energy and resources that you put in to making your art and making an EP, a single, a record as a musician, a lot of times you get to the finish, you think that's the finish line. That's kind of just the starting line, which is then where a lot of the great mentorship of what you guys do kind of starts to come in. And admittedly, I did not have quite the same background at that time with a lot of the nuanced digital marketing platforms and things like that. But I had a lot of experience having worked through each of our records creatively, having understood our own band and brand and how we tried to put that story out there with all the possible outlets, and what our label had bestowed upon us and from an industry-wide standpoint and things that they were looking at throughout our career. And I realized I was I actually maybe do have a couple answers and thoughts, having known you and gone through that process and seeing you make all those choices one by one that are kind of defining you and your brand and image. So I was like, well, why don't you just come in and the next session when we finish this mix, just stay for an hour afterwards and we'll chat down some of these questions and kind of figure out a plan. So I realized when the pandemic hit, that was the one thing that I could do because I couldn't have clients in the studio. I couldn't have sessions, right? I could still do that portion of it. It's like, hey, you have these songs. Let's try and get a head start on figuring out everything else about the release and try and make it a little bit more cohesive until things come back. So now it's been 2 years, and that has kind of grown into something that I realized I really love and really get a lot of personal fulfillment out of. And it's helped me in a lot of ways transition out of some of maybe lingering imposter syndrome type mindsets, to where I'm just well, I got to know every answer to every question any artist is ever going to throw at me, right? And realizing that's not necessarily the case. Literally nobody has all of those answers. And if they do, you should turn away and run because they're not a real human. They're probably a robot. So I've been doing that now as well. That's kind of brought me till now where I've continued to do that. I have a couple different artists that I work with all over the world. And it's been really cool. Some of them have found me organically and just seen what I do and kind of what ideas I put out there, in general day-to-day stuff, and has started with a conversation. And now it's something that I can do, and it allows me to be flexible with it outside of the rest of the stuff that I do, which is mostly remote production at the current time. And it allows me to learn by teaching, which is also a really interesting thing that I'm sure you and Ed probably know a lot about at this point, because your days are in a cool way filled with doubling down on the lessons that you already know and reinforcing them further, and then seeing them prove themselves through the eyes and careers of other people as you go. So it's been fun. Yeah.
That's definitely an interesting similarity. And I think that kind of ties back to what you were saying, just kind of about what drives your business-minded spirit, being a problem solver. I think from a producer standpoint, as like a producer and a mix engineer myself, same sort of thing. Like, you see so many great projects come through that you're like, oh, this is so good. I want to make sure that people hear it. And then if an artist leaves and that's the last touch you have with them, that record might not see more than their family or their close friends. And that sucks. So that's a cool problem solving sort of space to be in, being able to take the experiences that you've had over multiple records. And also having your hands in, I love the idea of having your hands in creative projects that aren't you making a noise rock record or, an alt pop record or something like that. I think that's really cool. That sort of creative drive and problem solving sort of drive being the thing that pushes you forward as a business person is not often what people think about when they think about why someone, has a different sector of their business or something. It's just like, I'm curious, I'm learning, and I'm really thirsty to be creative. I think that's really cool. Like, it's a great philosophy, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that honestly, the things that have come into my world when I let them and when I didn't just try to control everything and hold everything so tightly has been incredible, honestly. And when you free yourself up to learn some things, and especially learn some things from other people, a lot of that imposter syndrome stuff goes away. All of a sudden you feel way more comfortable getting in front of an audience, getting online and speaking to people, like yourself. I think also doing the podcast has been an interesting foray into that world for me. I mean, I've done press over the years and obviously played plenty of shows in front of a whole lot of people. And it's never a stage fright thing, but also I'm not talking like this about the deep inner workings of what, how I see my life and frame the things I do.
The one-to-many of social media? You mean you're not talking about that to the press?
Right. So that's why I kind of go and find mediums where I can do that with other people, if for nothing else than to reaffirm some of those lessons to myself and kind of go over it. But also what I found is I was like, turns out there are a couple people. I mean, I know they're probably listening. Well, if they've stuck with us this long, they're listening to your podcast right now, and they're probably showing up with you guys every week because I know that they're showing up with me every week and they're commenting and messaging me every day in that regard. And I think that's really the crux of it, where when I kind of let it happen and stopped worrying so much about the what other people think kind of thing and realizing like, hey, I have these things. These are my thoughts. I will put them in a place that if someone feels like they resonate with them, they can come in closer. But if someone doesn't, they can just keep walking by and it's fine. I don't need to go insert myself and be for everybody. It's okay. And I'd actually rather be just for the people that enjoy it and resonate with it and maybe need to hear something, some fragment at that time. And I think that's way cooler than anything that could be happening on a viral video or something like that, because it tends to not always be the deep thoughts with Jack Handy things that go viral, as it turns out. But the things that last, I think, is what I'm in the business of now as an entrepreneur.
I love that, man. That's so good. Dude, this was such a blast. I really appreciate you coming on and hanging out and just sharing these stories. This is the kind of stuff that I think a lot of artists probably wish they could hear on a more regular basis. One, about being more authentic, about trying to solve problems, whether that's for their band, whether that's for the people that they work with, whether that's for their fans. I think a lot of the philosophies that you apply at the highest level to your life are really, really important for people to think about, especially if you're pursuing a creative career. So I'm definitely feeling inspired and pretty juiced up right now. So thank you for just coming in and wanting to be so open and honest about it all. What's coming up? Where can people find you? What's happening in the next couple months? I know there's a ton. Oh man, where can we start?
Oh yeah, wow. Well, some of it I've already mentioned, like the podcast, The Record Process, a slew of new episodes and great interviews talking through the stories about a ton of really amazing and some legendary records, both in our world and outside of it too. So that is probably happening right now, or February of 2022 is when that will start, did start, has started, whatever.
Time isn't real anymore.
Time is not real at all, my friend. So you can find that on Instagram at The Record Process, or on our the studio website, which is truelevelstudio.com. There's a tab there, /The Record Process, and there's some cool info on that, and you can find everything. And I would suggest to opt in, if you will, to the mailing list, because we do have some cool giveaways from some actual great partnerships, Jack, that I think you will probably, I have a feeling, be signing up for that, because I know if you don't have them already, you'll probably want some of these toys because I love them. So you can go ahead and do that. You can find me at my website, which is just my name with a .com after it, CaseyCavaliere.com. And the band, The Wonder Years, at thewonderyearsband.com, and on all socials under the same name. That's really about it in terms of where I'm showing up right now.
That's it? That's all?
If there's any other questions, like I said, I'm no stranger to fielding a good old slide into a DM on my Instagram, which is case_rock. So that is probably where, if on any social media platform I'm showing up, it's that one most consistently these days.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, dude. So appreciative of you being here. I'm sure that our listeners loved getting some insights from you. So thanks again, man.
Yeah, I hope so. And thank you for having me. It's a blast, and I will continue to listen to the show. I really love it. I think you're putting out some great knowledge and some great intuition into the world. So thank you for that as well, Jack.
Oh, thank you, man. Thanks so much. And everybody, make sure you check out True Level Studio, check out The Record Process as the new episodes are coming out. Keep up with the Wonder Years on the road, and we'll catch you guys next time on Creative Juice. Peace out, Indies.